Hello and welcome. This is an Honest Reporting podcast. I'm Simon Plosker, the managing editor. Today I'm joined by Howard Feldman. Howard has come all the way from South Africa. He is a presenter on Chai FM, and I'm really pleased to say that I actually have a 10-minute slot every Tuesday afternoon on the Drive Time show with Howard. And we discuss all the latest media bias issues. And now it's my turn to be able to sort of switch things round and actually ask Howard a few questions about the situation in South Africa, the media there, the coverage of Israel, and South African-Israel relations. Howard, welcome to Jerusalem, welcome to Honest Reporting. Great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about Chai FM for starters.
Yeah, let's begin there. Thank you, Simon. It's great to actually sit with you face to face rather than doing it on Skype. And as Simon said, we interview Simon every Tuesday, and you can live stream it. It's on www.chaifm.com. My name is Howard Feldman. It's your afternoon with Howard Feldman, and you'll just follow the links and be able to listen to live stream. In fact, we have a tremendous amount of people from all around the world that do tune in specifically for that slot, because it's of global and universal interest, certainly to those who support Israel and who support the truth. Chai FM is a Jewish radio station. It's a community radio station. That said, it reaches about 50% of our listener base is not Jewish. We have people listening obviously all over South Africa, but in fact all over the world. And we obviously it's difficult to ascertain exact numbers when people are listening on the car radio, but the estimate figures are around about 85,000 people tuning in at any time, which is a very, very nice support base. We follow various items. We cover South African news, we cover Israel news, current affairs, and of course all items of Jewish interest.
Mm-hmm. And just remind us, how big is the Jewish community in South Africa?
Ooh, that's a very difficult question, because if you ask any South African, generally not affiliated with the community, they'll tell you the millions of Jews. Perhaps lowest figure they'll go is 500,000. In reality, it's probably about 60 to 80,000 Jews across South Africa.
A very small community.
Very small community, very vocal community, and an important community. They were very much involved with the struggle against apartheid and moving towards a new dispensation for freedom in South Africa. Economically, obviously there's no stereotype. There are wealthy Jews and there are very poor Jews. There are all sorts, but the Jewish community has been very influential in many areas of business, of medicine, of law, etc. Sport, not really, though, we find we're still working on that a little bit.
I mean, you mentioned the apartheid era. I mean, it's one of the things that comes up continuously at the moment, the charge that Israel's an apartheid state. And one of the most, I think, disturbing things is when it comes from South Africa and South Africans. I mean, we see, for example, Bishop Desmond Tutu accusing Israel of all sorts of things. I mean, how do you even explain the fact that people who suffered under real apartheid seem to be transferring that sort of experience onto the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even though, of course, for those of us here, it's clearly obvious that this is an absolute falsehood.
So it concerns me greatly, and it actually concerns me very much from a South African perspective, because, and I've written many articles on this, it's quite a sad situation where people are prepared to give up their own history. Anybody who really understands what apartheid was, and I was perhaps fortunate to see the end of apartheid, but there was a part of my life that we were very much in that system. It is a horror beyond description, and it's very sad for me that South Africans are so quick to give up on what really was a tremendously agonizing period. In fact, since 1994, when apartheid officially ended, the remnants are still there, and it's going to be there for the next generation or two, and it hasn't been fully dealt with. That is the horror of apartheid, that destroyed families, that destroyed lives in the most horrific way, purely on a racial basis. The fact that Israel is being accused of that is just, it's actually silly. It's really silly. And when you have people like Desmond Tutu, who has done so well in some areas of his life, but when it comes to Jews and when it comes to Israel, the guy's got a glitch. He just can't see reality, and he can't see what's really there.
Well, I mean, it seems to me to be an insult to the millions of South Africans who suffered it.
That's why it's tremendously sad, because, and of course what it does is it waters down the word, so that now every situation is apartheid. And if everything is apartheid, then nothing is apartheid. And that's the tremendously sad thing. You know, you've got to defend it. You've got to actually defend the word for what it is.
And how are Israel-South African relations right now?
Charming. It's absolutely charming. We're peaking right now. No, we're not. There was just the ANC conference that happened in December. The very good news was, and that's for South Africans, and I think for the Jewish community as well, was that Cyril Ramaphosa has been chosen as the new head of the ANC. He's a very astute businessman. He is a person who most South Africans would have wanted. He's very much against corruption. So I think that's important on that side. What is horrific is the fact that Hamas were invited to attend this conference. And the fact that they were there was of course a terrible situation, but worse than that was they put on the agenda the discussion around the ANC wishing to downgrade relationships between Israel and South Africa. Everybody on the panel was of course very much pro this motion. They didn't have anybody who wasn't, and the motion was passed unanimously. So it doesn't mean that it will come into effect. I don't believe it will. I'm going to be slightly cynical and say the ANC have never achieved anything positive, or anything actually that they've set their minds to do aside from corruption, so I can't imagine that they'll achieve this. But I also think that good sense will prevail. It's an absurdity. You can't focus on Israel when you have a Syrian crisis, when South Africa has been complicit in the situation in Zimbabwe. They could have ended that years ago, where you've got the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Tibetans. You've got list after list after list, and the South African government chooses to focus on Israel. It's hypocrisy at its absolute worst. And most South Africans are very unhappy about how this happened. In fact, I wrote an open letter to the ANC that was published on News 24, and it had hundreds of thousands of reads. And in fact, whereas obviously I got a negative backlash from those who don't support Israel, I also got a tremendous amount of very positive support from non-Jewish South Africans who say this is completely absurd. Israel has so much to offer the world. Israel can teach so much. Israel is making a massive difference just north of our borders in Africa, with regard to water, bringing power to so many countries, helping where needed, that it's just a complete absurdity.
I mean, do South Africans even care about Israel?
So that's actually a very interesting question. They don't. They don't. And as somebody who writes on the subject a lot, I always have to balance how much I shove Israel down anybody's throat, because it is they don't care. South Africans have very real issues. Our growth rate last year was something like 0.75%. Our unemployment rate is through the roof. Poverty is a major problem. Educationally, we are floundering unless you are able to send your kid to a private school. National health is a complete disaster. There are very, very real issues that affect South Africans, and that's what they care about.
Yeah, I mean, and regarding the media, now at Honest Reporting we get sent a number of things from South Africa, and they really are extremely unpleasant. I mean, obviously I only get sent the negative stuff.
We should start sending you the positive. You won't need to create a whole folder for it in your inbox. No, so again, as always, it depends on we've got repeat offenders. And there's a group of newspapers owned by a gentleman by the name of Iqbal Survey, and he is notoriously anti-Israel. So any time a so-called Palestinian delegation arrives in South Africa, we're touting children, they will get front page coverage. And what they will do is they will literally take their pamphlets and their brochures, and they will reprint it almost word for word as though it's fact. They won't interview the other side. In fact, recently we had that situation, I think we spoke about it, where article that was more than 3 years old was published as a current article.
Right, yeah.
The article itself was horrifically anti-Israel. It was a picture in space where apparently you could see the Israeli rocket fire over Gaza. It was an absurdity, again, to use that word, but they published a retraction which wasn't a particularly large retraction, but that they are notoriously anti-Israel. If something anti-Semitic happens, and that's also quite funny, they try and kosher themselves to say, well, you know, and they come up very strongly against anti-Semitism, but that's just to, I believe, allow anti-Israel anti-Semitism at a different date.
Right. In terms of how honest reporting can help with the South African situation, I mean, obviously we have a lot of resources about dealing with the apartheid libel in terms of reactions to press out there. I know we have a lot of South African supporters and subscribers. Now, I would actually ask people over there, please send us some of the things that you see, because if we don't see them, then we can't respond, we can't help. So, obviously I would encourage that.
Well, it's interesting because I had a conversation with somebody and they said, why aren't honest reporting more active in South Africa? And I said, well, how many items have you sent them? And they said, no, must I send them? So I said, well, who do you think is going to be doing this? You can't be expected to scour every newspaper and every online article around the world every day. So I think that's
we almost do, just to point out.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. But I do think South Africa is important, because that was the next question, is South Africa's got a very small community. What would happen to Israel if South Africa had to completely disconnect from Israeli diplomacy? The reality is, from an Israel perspective, there will be a small impact, but not a great impact. It will impact really those of us who still live there, and those of us who live here that want that connection. That said, I do believe that South Africa is ground zero for BDS, and I think that what is happening in South Africa spreads around the world. I believe that if this downgrade happens from between Israel and South Africa, they will be the first country within a democratic country to have done so. And I think that is a very, very dangerous precedent. So I do think it's very important to focus on what is happening in South Africa. And it's obviously, might sound self-serving, but I really do think that it works, that it's an important thing to have a look at. It's an important geography.
Right. And I think as well that South Africa is seen almost as, to use for want of a better phrase, a light unto the nations in a way, given its history.
Look, it's blinking a little. It's a little dimmer than it used to be, but I do think that that it can come back. South Africa can be a very, very powerful country. Indeed.
Howard, it's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to being back on the show.
Tuesday, don't be late.
Next Tuesday. I will definitely not be late.
Maybe we won't have anything to talk about because everybody will have been perfectly honest the whole week.
Unfortunately, I doubt it. Howard Feldman, thank you for joining us. This has been an Honest Reporting podcast. Thank you for joining us as well.